If your garden turns dull, patchy, or flat-looking every single season, you're definitely not alone. Most gardeners don't realize this at first, but the problem usually isn't effort, it's plant selection. You can water regularly, prune carefully, even fertilize on schedule, and still end up with empty gaps, fading color, and that tired garden look for half the year. Now imagine walking outside and seeing something different. Not a garden that struggles to stay alive, but one that stays consistently green, structured, and full of life, even when seasons change, temperatures swing, or you're simply too busy to maintain it. That difference doesn't come from doing more work. It comes from choosing the right plants from the start. And in this video, I'm going to show you 8 low-maintenance plants that quietly keep your garden green all year long. These are not complicated, high-maintenance showpieces. These are the steady performers, the plants experienced gardeners rely on when they want stability instead of stress. Let's start with the foundation. Number 1, Evergreen ground cover, the living carpet. This is where most healthy, stable gardens actually begin, even if people don't notice it. Evergreen ground covers are low-growing plants that spread across the soil and keep it covered in a living layer of green. At first glance, they might seem simple or even unimportant, but this is exactly where the mistake starts for many beginners. Bare soil is one of the biggest reasons gardens start looking patchy. It dries out faster, invites weeds, and makes the whole space feel unfinished. Ground covers quietly solve that problem. They create a soft, natural carpet that holds moisture in the soil, reduces weed growth, and keeps your garden visually full even when other plants are resting or slowing down. Plants like creeping thyme or other hardy spreading varieties are often used here, depending on your climate. Once established, they don't demand constant attention. They just expand slowly and steadily, filling in empty spaces that would normally look neglected. But there's a detail many gardeners miss. Spacing and sunlight matter more than people think. If you plant them too close, they can overcrowd and weaken. Too far apart, and weeds will take over before the coverage fills in. The balance is what creates that clean, continuous green look. And yes, in some climates, they can spread more aggressively than expected, so a little control in early growth goes a long way. Still, when done right, ground cover becomes the invisible foundation of a healthy garden. It's not flashy, but it's doing some of the most important work in the background. Now that we've covered the ground layer, let's move upward and talk about something that adds movement, height, and year-round structure to your garden. Number 2, ornamental grass, the movement maker. If ground covers are the foundation, ornamental grasses are what give your garden its rhythm. These plants are often overlooked because they don't always have bright flowers or dramatic colors. But what they do have is structure, and that structure lasts through most of the year. Even when many plants start fading in colder months or dry conditions, ornamental grasses often remain standing, keeping shape and movement in the garden when everything else feels flat. When the wind passes through them, they create a soft motion that makes the entire space feel alive. It's subtle, but it changes the mood of a garden completely. This is also where experienced gardeners think differently. Instead of constantly replacing seasonal flowers, they use grasses to maintain consistent height and texture in the landscape. It reduces the empty corner problem that many gardens struggle with. They're also drought-resistant in many cases and don't require heavy feeding or complicated care routines. Once established, they mainly need one light trim per year to refresh growth. But there's a mistake worth mentioning. Cutting them too early or too aggressively can actually weaken their regrowth and reduce their visual structure. Timing matters more than effort here. When used correctly, ornamental grasses act like a stabilizing frame for your garden design. They hold everything together visually, even when flowering plants come and go. Now that we've built structure and foundation, let's move into something that adds both beauty and practical use in a very different way, something you can actually bring into your kitchen as well. Number 3, Rosemary, the evergreen kitchen shield. Rosemary is one of those plants that quietly earns its place in almost any low-maintenance garden. At first, it looks like just another herb. But over time, it becomes much more than that. In many climates, rosemary stays green throughout the year, even when other herbs die back or slow down. Its woody structure keeps it looking strong and stable, which is why it often appears in both decorative gardens and kitchen gardens. But the real value is how tough it is once established. It handles dry conditions surprisingly well, especially compared to more delicate herbs. In fact, one of the most common reasons rosemary fails is not neglect, but overwatering. Too much moisture can quickly damage its root. That's a detail many beginners don't expect. It also plays a quiet protective role in the garden. Many gardeners notice fewer pests around areas where rosemary is planted, especially when used near vegetables or along borders. This doesn't mean it eliminates pests completely, but it can contribute to a more balanced garden environment. The key is simple. Give it well-drained soil, plenty of sunlight, and don't overcare for it. Rosemary does better when it's not constantly disturbed. And when it thrives, it doesn't just sit in the background. It adds structure, scent, and usefulness all at once. Now we move into a completely different type of challenge in gardening, areas where sunlight is limited, and most plants struggle to survive. Number 4. Hostas, the shade survivors. Not every garden has full sun. In fact, many gardens have at least one area that feels difficult to fill because it's always shaded, often under trees, near walls, or along fences. This is where hostas become incredibly valuable. They are known for their broad, lush leaves that bring consistent greenery to areas where other plants simply fail. Instead of struggling for sunlight, they naturally adapt to low-light environments and keep those spaces looking full and alive. This is why they're often used to fix dark corners of a garden that would otherwise look empty or forgotten. But there's an important caution here. Hostas can attract pests like slugs, especially in damp conditions. If left unmanaged, this can damage the leaves and reduce their clean appearance. Simple natural control methods, like keeping the area clean and improving airflow, usually help keep that in balance. When used properly, hostas turn problem areas into one of the most visually rich parts of a garden. Instead of fighting shade, you start working with it. And now that we've covered shade and structure, the next plant takes us into a completely different survival strategy, thriving in heat, dryness, and tough soil conditions. Now that we've covered structure, shade, and the plants that quietly stabilize your garden, we move into something completely different. This next group is about survival. These are the plants that don't just survive difficult conditions. They stay visually strong even when everything around them starts to struggle. Number 5. Sedum, the drought armor plant. If there is one plant that truly understands tough conditions, it's sedum. At first glance, it looks almost too simple to matter. Thick leaves, compact growth, no dramatic flowers most of the time. But that simplicity is exactly why it works so well in low-maintenance gardens. Sedum stores water inside its leaves, which means it can handle heat and dry soil far better than many traditional garden plants. While other plants start to wilt or lose color during hot spells, sedum often stays stable and green, quietly holding its place in the landscape. This makes it especially valuable in areas where watering is inconsistent or soil quality is poor. But here's where many gardeners make a mistake. They treat sedum like a normal garden plant and overwater it. That's one of the fastest ways to damage it. Sedum actually prefers dry conditions and well-drained soil. Too much moisture can cause rot and weaken its structure. When planted correctly, it spreads gently and fills gaps without taking over aggressively. It works well in borders, rocky areas, or even containers where other plants struggle. The real value of sedum is not attention, it's consistency. It stays present, stable, and green when many plants can't. And from here, we move into something more formal and structured, plants that shape the entire layout of a garden, not just fill space. Number 6. Boxwood, the living structure wall. If sedum is about survival, boxwood is about control and structure. This is one of those plants that instantly changes how a garden feels. Instead of loose, scattered growth, boxwood brings order. It forms clean lines, defined shapes, and structured boundaries that stay green throughout the year. That consistent appearance is why it's often used in hedges, borders, and formal garden layouts. Unlike fast-growing plants that constantly change shape, boxwood grows slowly and steadily. That slow growth is actually an advantage because it reduces maintenance and keeps the design stable for long periods. But it does require some attention. The biggest mistake gardeners make with boxwood is improper pruning. Cutting it too aggressively or at the wrong time can leave uneven growth or damage its natural shape. Light, controlled trimming works far better than heavy reshaping. Another point to remember is that while boxwood is hardy, it still benefits from occasional care to avoid pests or stress in dense growth areas. When used correctly, boxwood becomes the frame of your garden. It doesn't try to stand out, it holds everything together visually. Now we move from structured hedges into something softer, more natural, and much closer to a woodland environment. Number 7. Ferns, the ancient green survivors. Ferns bring a completely different feeling to a garden. Instead of sharp lines or structured growth, they offer softness, layering, and movement in shaded, moist areas. They feel almost like a small piece of forest has been added into your backyard. What makes ferns special is their ability to maintain greenery in places where many ornamental plants struggle. Shady corners, damp soil, and protected areas often become perfect homes for them. Once established, they create a lush, textured backdrop that stays visually consistent through much of the year. But they do have one clear requirement: moisture. Ferns do not tolerate dry conditions well. If the soil dries out too often, their leaves can quickly become weak or faded. This is why they perform best in naturally shaded, slightly humid environments. A common mistake is placing them in too much sun or forgetting how quickly they respond to dryness. When positioned correctly, however, they bring a very calming, natural feel to the garden, almost like a quiet green layer beneath taller plants. They don't dominate space, they complete it. And now we move into the final plant in this list, one that doesn't stay grounded like the others, but climbs, spreads, and transforms vertical surfaces entirely. Number 8. Ivy or jasmine vine, the vertical green builder. This is where your garden stops being just horizontal space. Climbing vines like ivy or jasmine introduce a completely different layer of greenery, vertical growth. Instead of filling soil or borders, they cover walls, fences, and structures with living green surfaces. Over time, they can completely change how a space feels, turning plain or empty walls into dense, natural coverage. This is one of the fastest ways to create a full garden look without adding many individual plants. But there is an important balance to understand here. Vines grow with strong intention. If left completely unmanaged, they can spread into unwanted areas or become difficult to control. This is why regular trimming and guidance are essential. When trained properly, they create stunning green walls that stay visually rich throughout the year, depending on climate and variety. They also add privacy and softness to hard structures, which is something many gardeners value in small yards or urban spaces. The key is control, not restriction. You're guiding growth, not fighting it. And with that, we've covered the 8 core plants that form the foundation of a low-maintenance, year-round green garden system. In the next part, we'll bring everything together with practical optimization tips, simple mistakes to avoid, and how to combine these plants for the best long-term result. Now that you've seen all 8 plants, there's something important to understand. A green, low-maintenance garden is not just about what you plant, it's about how those plants work together. Even the best plants can struggle if they're placed in the wrong conditions or mixed without a plan. This final section is where everything comes together into a system that actually stays stable year-round. Bonus expert tips. make every plant work harder. If there's one thing experienced gardeners learn over time, it's this: plants don't fail randomly. They fail because their environment doesn't match their need. Start with grouping. Plants that need similar water levels should stay together. For example, drought-tolerant plants like sedum and rosemary should not be placed right next to moisture-loving plants like ferns. That imbalance alone can slowly weaken both sides over time. Soil also plays a bigger role than most beginners realize. Good drainage is essential for plants like rosemary and sedum, while ferns prefer soil that holds moisture longer. If you match the soil condition properly, maintenance drops dramatically without you changing anything else. Another key detail is sunlight direction. Many gardeners plant based on space, not light. But even low-maintenance plants perform differently depending on whether they get morning sun, afternoon heat, or constant shade. And then there's the most overlooked mistake: overcare. Most garden problems don't come from neglect. They come from doing too much. Overwatering, overtrimming, and constantly fixing plants can actually reduce their natural stability. When you step back and let each plant settle into its role, the entire garden becomes easier to manage. Think of it less like controlling a garden, and more like setting up a system that maintains itself. The big picture: what you've actually built. If you combine these 8 plants correctly, something interesting happens. You don't just get a collection of greenery. You get layers. Ground cover holds the soil. Ornamental grasses add movement. Boxwood creates structure. Ferns soften shaded areas. Sedum stabilizes dry zones. Rosemary adds resilience and function. Hostas fill the shade. Vines complete the vertical space. Together, they form a garden that doesn't depend on constant intervention to look alive. That's the real goal here. Not perfection, not constant blooming, but stability. A garden that still feels green even when life gets busy, seasons change, or conditions aren't ideal. Number 5. Sedum, the drought armor plant. If there is one plant that truly understands tough conditions, it's sedum. At first glance, it looks almost too simple to matter. Thick leaves, compact growth, no dramatic flowers most of the time. But that simplicity is exactly why it works so well in low-maintenance gardens. Sedum stores water inside its leaves, which means it can handle heat and dry soil far better than many traditional garden plants. While other plants start to wilt or lose color during hot spells, sedum often stays stable and green, quietly holding its place in the landscape. This makes it especially valuable in areas where watering is inconsistent or soil quality is poor. But here's where many gardeners make a mistake. They treat sedum like a normal garden plant and overwater it. That's one of the fastest ways to damage it. Sedum actually prefers dry conditions and well-drained soil. Too much moisture can cause rot and weaken its structure. When planted correctly, it spreads gently and fills gaps without taking over aggressively. It works well in borders, rocky areas, or even containers where other plants struggle. The real value of sedum is not attention, it's consistency. It stays present, stable, and green when many plants can't. And from here, we move into something more formal and structured: plants that shape the entire layout of a garden, not just fill space.